The metal folding chair scraped against the linoleum floor with a screech that could peel paint. Deborah Hartwell, known to everyone in Oak Ridge Estates as the most feared HOA board member, adjusted her reading glasses and cleared her throat. Her manicured finger traced a complaint document with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "Michael Rodriguez," she announced, her voice sharp enough to slice through the humid community center air, "you are hereby cited for unauthorized pool removal and landscaping modification without board approval." The room fell silent. 27 pairs of eyes suddenly locked onto Michael, who sat stunned at the far end of the room. His tan skin flushed slightly, a mixture of embarrassment and rising anger brewing just beneath the surface. It wasn't just any pool. It was the pool he'd inherited from the previous homeowner, a dilapidated, cracked monstrosity that had become a mosquito breeding ground and a safety hazard. After getting quotes that would have made a heart surgeon wince, Michael had decided to remove it himself. Carefully, methodically, legally, or so he thought. Deborah, or Hevo Karen, as the neighborhood whispered behind her back, lived for moments like these. Her silver bob was perfectly coiffed, her blazer pressed with military precision. She lived alone in a meticulously maintained Tudor-style home at the end of Sycamore Lane, and her entire existence seemed dedicated to enforcing every single line of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association rulebook. The pool removal was not pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee, she continued, her tone suggesting Michael had committed a crime worse than grand theft. Section 4.2, subsection C clearly states that any structural changes require a minimum of 30-day notification and detailed architectural plans. Michael's mind raced. He had researched. He had been careful. He had even consulted local ordinances. The pool was on his property. He had paid for its removal. What possible violation could there be? Little did Michael know that this moment would become a legendary tale in Oak Ridge Estates, a story that would spread faster than summer Bermuda grass and create ripples of consequence nobody could have predicted. Deborah slid a thick manila folder across the table. Printed photographs showed the excavation site from multiple angles. Measurements, diagrams, documentation so extensive it looked like a federal investigation rather than a neighborhood complaint. Furthermore, she added, her reading glasses catching the fluorescent light, unauthorized landscaping modifications require immediate remediation. You have 72 hours to submit a comprehensive restoration plan. The other board members nodded solemnly. To an outsider, it might have looked like a tribunal. To the residents of Oak Ridge Estates, it was just another Tuesday night HOA meeting. Michael gripped the arms of his chair. He knew Deborah Hartwell. Everyone knew Deborah Hartwell. And this was far from over. What Deborah didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Michael was about to fight back in a way that would become neighborhood legend. The pool removal was just the beginning of a conflict that would expose the true nature of power in their seemingly perfect suburban world. The morning after the HOA meeting, Michael Rodriguez's inbox exploded with a digital paper trail that would make a bureaucrat weep. 3 formal letters from the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association arrived simultaneously, one by certified mail, one by email, and one hand-delivered by a trembling intern wearing khakis and a polo shirt with the HOA logo. Each document repeated the same fundamental accusation: unauthorized property modification. Michael was a software engineer, a man who lived and breathed precision. He spent weeks researching before removing so much as a light switch, let alone an entire in-ground swimming pool. The pool had been a nightmare since the day he purchased the property. Cracked concrete, rusted metal, a structural disaster waiting to collapse. His neighbor, Frank Williams, had warned him. Deborah Hartwell doesn't miss a thing. Frank had said over their shared fence, pruning his prize-winning roses. She once reported Old Man Henderson for having trash cans 2 inches outside the designated storage area. The man got a $250 fine. The pool removal had been surgical. Michael had hired a licensed contractor, obtained all necessary city permits, and ensured proper disposal of concrete and metal. He even brought in environmental specialists to test the soil and ensure no contamination occurred during the removal. But Deborah Hartwell saw violations where others saw responsible homeownership. The hand-delivered letter contained a detailed report with no fewer than 17 potential infractions: soil disturbance, potential underground utility interference, landscaping modification without prior approval. The list read like a Kafka-esque nightmare of bureaucratic overreach. Michael's phone buzzed. It was his best friend, Carlos, a local attorney who specialized in real estate law. "Don't respond to anything," Carlos advised. "Not yet. Let me review these documents." But Michael knew Deborah. She wouldn't stop. This was personal now, a power play in the carefully manicured world of Oak Ridge Estates, where perfect lawns and pristine mailboxes were more than aesthetic choices. They were statements of community control. What Deborah didn't know was that Michael had kept every single receipt, every permit, every communication with city officials. He had documentation that would make an IRS auditor look disorganized. The Asia board meeting had been just the opening salvo. Michael was preparing for a full-scale defensive strategy that would expose the true nature of neighborhood power dynamics. He'd survived corporate software development wars. This was just another complex system to debug. His cat, Mr. Whiskers, watched from the windowsill as Michael began organizing his documentation. The massive white Persian seemed to raise an eyebrow, as if to say, "This is going to get interesting." Little did Michael know that the next move would come from an unexpected direction. A twist that would involve local law enforcement, a bizarre interpretation of city ordinances, and a revelation that would shake the very foundation of Oak Ridge Estate's carefully constructed social hierarchy. The suburban battlefield was about to get very complicated. The first police cruiser arrived precisely at 8:47 a.m., its white paint gleaming under the morning sunlight. Officer Rachel Martinez stepped out, her boots clicking against the meticulously maintained sidewalk of Sycamore Lane. Michael watched from his front window, Mr. Whiskers perched dramatically on the windowsill beside him. This was not the response Michael had expected when Deborah Hartwell filed her complaint. Carlos had warned him about potential escalation, but this felt different. The officer looked more bemused than official, her expression suggesting she'd seen her fair share of HOA-related nonsense in her decade on the force. "Mr. Rodriguez?" Officer Martinez called, her clipboard tucked professionally under her arm. Michael opened the door, suddenly aware he was wearing pajama pants with little coding jokes printed on them. Not exactly his most intimidating outfit. "We received a complaint about unauthorized property modification," she began, glancing at the now empty pool area. Specifically, pool removal without proper municipal documentation. What happened next would become neighborhood legend. Carlos had prepared Michael meticulously. Every permit, every communication, every single piece of documentation was neatly organized in a blue accordion folder that Michael now presented to Officer Martinez. Her eyebrow raised slightly as she began reviewing the documents. 1 page, 2 pages. The entire stack of municipal approvals, contractor certifications, and soil testing reports grew into a small mountain of bureaucratic validation. "Ms. Hartwell filed a report claiming potential environmental hazards," Officer Martinez said, her tone shifting from official to slightly amused. "But these documents suggest you've been more thorough than most government contractors." Mr. Whiskers chose that moment to let out a dramatic meow, as if offering commentary on the proceedings. The real surprise came when Officer Martinez pulled out a second document. It was a formal complaint from the Oak Ridge Estate's Homeowners Association, but something looked off. "Do you recognize these signatures?" she asked, pointing to the bottom of the complaint. Michael leaned closer. 2 board members' signatures appeared to be forged, or at least suspiciously similar in handwriting. Officer Martinez's professional demeanor didn't change, but a hint of a smile played at the corner of her mouth. "Interesting document," she said simply. What had started as a routine complaint about pool removal was transforming into something far more complex. Deborah Hartwell had escalated a simple property modification into a potential investigation of HOA board practices. Michael realized this was no longer just about a removed swimming pool. This was about power, control, the unwritten rules of suburban social dynamics that kept neighborhoods like Oak Ridge Estates running with machine-like precision. Mr. Whiskers seemed to purr with anticipation. The game, as they say, was about to get interesting. The Oak Ridge Estates Community Center buzzed with more electricity than a transformer station on a hot summer day. Word had spread about Michael Rodriguez's pool removal and the subsequent police visit, a narrative that grew more elaborate with each retelling. Frank Williams, Michael's next-door neighbor, leaned against the wall during the emergency HOA board meeting, his pruning shears tucked into his belt like a weapon of suburban warfare. He'd been collecting gossip like others collected rare coins, and today's meeting promised to be his magnum opus. Deborah Hartwell sat at the head of the table, her perfectly pressed blazer looking slightly less crisp than usual. The forged signatures on the complaint hung in the air like a bad smell, an unspoken tension that nobody wanted to address directly. "The matter of Mr. Rodriguez's unauthorized pool removal," Deborah began, her voice carefully modulated, "requires a full board investigation." But something had changed. The other board members exchanged glances. Michael's meticulously prepared documentation, combined with the police department's apparent lack of concern, had shifted the power dynamic. Carlos, Michael's attorney friend, had advised a strategic approach. "Let them talk," he'd said. "Sometimes the best defense is letting people reveal themselves." And reveal themselves they did. Margaret Thompson, the board's longest-serving member, cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should review the actual municipal codes regarding pool removal," she suggested, her voice cutting through Deborah's typical bombast. The room went silent. Deborah's perfectly manicured fingers tightened around her pen. This wasn't going according to her script. For years, she ruled the Oak Ridge Estate's HOA with an iron fist wrapped in a silk glove. Complaints about grass length, citations for mailbox paint, warnings about holiday decorations placed 2 days too early. But Michael Rodriguez was different. He wasn't the typical homeowner who would simply roll over. Frank Williams watched the drama unfold, barely containing his excitement. He lived in the neighborhood for 32 years and had never seen the HOA board challenged quite like this. His wife Susan would be thrilled to hear every delicious detail of her dinner. The municipal codes are quite clear. Margaret continued, pulling out a thick binder of regulations. Mr. Rodriguez followed every single required procedure for pool removal. In fact, his documentation is more comprehensive than most professional contractors. Deborah's perfect silver bobs seemed to deflate slightly. What nobody in the room knew was that this moment marked the beginning of a significant shift in Oak Ridge Estates. The carefully constructed power structure was about to be challenged in ways no one could have predicted. Mr. Whiskers, had he been present, would have looked supremely satisfied. Cats always know when the tide is turning. The emails started trickling in, then flooding Michael's inbox like a digital tsunami. Residents of Oak Ridge Estates, those who had long suffered under Deborah Hartwell's microscopic rule, began sharing their own stories of HOA harassment. There was Susan Martinez, who'd been fined for a garden gnome 2 inches outside the approved landscaping zone. Tom Henderson, cited for having his trash cans visible from the street for precisely 47 minutes past the mandatory hidden time. Emily Chen warned about the exact shade of white on her window trim. Apparently, it was 0.5 shades too cream for the board's liking. Michael realized he wasn't just fighting his own battle anymore. He had become an unexpected champion for the neighborhood's silent sufferers. Carlos dropped by that evening, a thick manila folder tucked under his arm and a look of barely contained excitement on his face. "You're not going to believe this," he said, spreading documents across Michael's kitchen table while Mr. Whiskers watched with regal indifference. The forged signatures on the original complaint were just the tip of the iceberg. Financial discrepancies in the HOA's records, selective enforcement of rules, kickback schemes with local contractors. Each page revealed another layer of suburban bureaucratic dysfunction. "They've been running this neighborhood like a personal fiefdom," Carlos explained, tracing his finger along a spreadsheet of questionable expenses. "Deborah Hartwell isn't just enforcing rules, she's been profiting from them." The most damning evidence came from an unlikely source, Frank Williams. The rose-trimming neighbor had been meticulously keeping records for years. Copies of every complaint, every fine, every interaction with the HOA board. His wife Susan had encouraged him, joking that one day someone might need the documentation. That day had arrived. Michael's phone began to ring. Local news stations, community journalists, even a podcast that specialized in HOA horror stories wanted an interview. What had started as a simple pool removal had become a full-blown investigation into neighborhood governance. Deborah Hartwell's carefully constructed world was crumbling faster than the old concrete pool Michael had removed. The next HOA board meeting would be different. No more hushed whispers. No more unchallenged rulings. The residents of Oak Ridge Estates were finally finding their voice, and Michael Rodriguez had become their unexpected megaphone. Frank Williams watched from his perfectly manicured front yard, pruning shears in hand, a smile of quiet satisfaction spreading across his face. Sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes it comes from a removed swimming pool and a cat named Mr. Whiskers. The suburban revolution was just beginning. The county municipal building felt like neutral ground, a place where suburban myths could be dissected under the harsh light of bureaucratic scrutiny. Michael Rodriguez sat between Carlos and Frank Williams, surrounded by a collection of documentation that would make a librarian weep with joy. Investigator Helen Rees had seen her share of HOA complaints, but this was different. Different enough that she'd called in additional resources from 3 separate departments. "Let me get this straight," she said, spreading out the documents like a high-stakes poker hand. "The Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association has been issuing fines based on rules that don't actually exist in their own bylaws." Carlos nodded, his lawyer's smile barely contained. "Not just that. They've been creating interpretations of rules that conveniently generate revenue." The investigation had uncovered a labyrinth of financial irregularities. Contractors who received preferential treatment, fines that seemed to target specific homeowners, a system so carefully constructed that it had gone unnoticed for years. Deborah Hartwell was conspicuously absent from these proceedings. Her lawyer had submitted a series of increasingly desperate communications that read like a legal Hail Mary pass. Frank Williams leaned forward, his weathered hands folded neatly. "I've got documentation going back 15 years, he said quietly. "Every fine, every complaint, every selective enforcement." Mr. Whiskers would have been proud of the precision. The most shocking revelation wasn't the financial impropriety. It was the systematic targeting of homeowners who didn't fit a specific demographic. younger families, recent immigrants, anyone who didn't match the original vision of Oak Ridge Estates. Investigator Reyes made notes, her pen moving with surgical precision. This goes beyond a simple HOA complaint, she muttered, more to herself than to anyone in the room. Michael thought about the pool. The simple act of removing a cracked, dangerous swimming pool had become a catalyst for something much larger. A microscope into the hidden mechanics of suburban power. Carlos pulled out another folder. We've identified at least 17 homeowners who were systematically fined for violations that never existed, he explained. Some were forced to pay thousands of dollars for imaginary infractions. The municipal building felt charged with a different kind of electricity. This wasn't just about a swimming pool anymore. This was about justice, about challenging a system that had operated in the shadows for far too long. Outside, the suburban world of Oak Ridge Estates continued its carefully maintained facade, perfectly trimmed lawns, mailboxes aligned with mathematical precision, but something fundamental had changed. The first crack had appeared, and it had started with a removed swimming pool. The Oak Ridge Estates Community Center had never seen a turnout like this. Every seat was filled, every standing space occupied. The room buzzed with an electric anticipation that felt more like a revolution than a neighborhood meeting. Deborah Hartwell sat at the front table, her once impeccable appearance now slightly frayed. The silver bob remained perfectly coiffed, but the edges of her power suit seemed to have lost their crisp definition. Behind her, a forensic accountant and two municipal investigators arranged stacks of documents that told a story far more complex than any HOA complaint. Michael Rodriguez sat near the front, Mr. Whisker's cat carrier placed strategically beside him, a silent, furry witness to the proceedings. The investigation has uncovered systematic financial misconduct, the lead investigator began, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. Fabricated violations, selective enforcement, unauthorized fee collection. Frank Williams leaned forward, his wife Susan gripping his hand. They had been waiting for this moment for decades. The revelations came like waves. Kickback schemes with local contractors, fabricated fines targeting specific homeowners, a carefully constructed system of neighborhood control that had gone unchallenged for years. Each document projected on the large screen felt like another nail in the HOA's coffin. Carlos, Michael's attorney, had transformed from a legal advisor to a neighborhood hero. He methodically presented evidence of years of misconduct, his presentation a surgical dismantling of the HOA's credibility. This isn't just about a swimming pool, Carlos explained. This is about the systematic abuse of power in our community. The room erupted in applause. Deborah Hartwell said nothing. Her lawyer had advised complete silence, but the weight of years of control was visibly crushing her. The perfect suburban empress was being dethroned not with a dramatic confrontation, but with pages of meticulously gathered documentation. Michael thought about the moment he decided to remove the pool, a simple home improvement project that had become a catalyst for community change. Mr. Whiskers in his carrier seemed to purr with satisfaction. The municipal investigator continued. Refund procedures for improperly collected fines were being established. A complete restructuring of the HOA board was imminent. The carefully maintained facade of Oak Ridge Estates was crumbling, revealing the complex human stories beneath. Frank Williams caught Michael's eye and winked. Sometimes revolution comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes it starts with a removed swimming pool and a determined homeowner. The suburban world would never be the same again.